Justin Fields is here, but for how long? If he plays great, do the Jets commit and pay him big money? If he struggles, is this just another stop on the quarterback carousel for this team? The pressure is on, the stakes are high. Let's break it all down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, May 16th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we have a Friday mailbag for you. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions, but because of scheduling news this week, we are pushing the mailbag to Friday. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Our first question is about the Jets quarterback, Justin Fields. John, I'm a little concerned about the way the Jets handled the quarterback situation this offseason. I see Justin Fields as a no-win situation. If he plays really well, the Jets are probably going to have to give him a huge contract extension and overpay him this offseason in order to keep him in New York. If he plays poorly, it's just another disappointing quarterback move for the Jets. What do you think? Interesting question there. One thing I'll say for the Jets that I think was really good for them is that they got a second year on the contract with Justin Fields. So, if Fields was on a one-year contract and he dominated, then the Jets would have lacked any leverage heading into the following offseason. I think that the concerns about what happens if Fields plays well are overstated, because first of all, if Fields plays well, it's the best case scenario for the Jets. Like, we want to be in that situation. I mean, that's the reason they signed Fields was that they were hoping they would get into that situation. So, I mean, I don't want to take a positive like that and turn it into a negative, but I do have some general thoughts on this. I think that in many ways, the way we view the quarterback situation in the NFL is mistaken. I think that there's a general viewpoint that if you don't have Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, that the quarterbacks just aren't worth having. And that's simply not true. Now, in an ideal world, you want the superstar quarterback. You want the guy who's the big-time difference maker. But more than anything in the NFL, a quality guy means you got a shot. It means you got a shot to win games. And the hope is that Fields plays at a quality level. So, obviously, if he doesn't play well, he's probably not here next year. The Jets would have to eat about $10 million. But that's just something you live with if it doesn't work out. And for rolling the dice to try and find a solution for a quarterback, $10 million really isn't that big of a deal at the end of the day. But if Fields plays well, what are the dynamics? Well, again, first of all, the Jets do have him under contract, so they're not going to need to worry about the franchise tag. They're not going to need to worry about Fields potentially leaving in free agency. Would he be able to command a market resetting deal? I mean, I think the answer to that's almost certainly no. I think one big year is not going to put Fields in the position where he can demand to be the top paid quarterback in the league. But the other thing I'll say is that I don't think if a quarterback plays well, I don't think overpaying him is a huge problem. You look across the league, teams have given out mega deals to quarterbacks who really are kind of middle of the pack type guys. It's never really prevented them from having success. So, one example would be the Rams giving Jared Goff a huge contract extension. The key is what the Rams did afterwards, because it's better to have a mid-tier quarterback playing on a huge contract than it is to let him go and have nothing at the quarterback position. But that doesn't mean you stop searching. Just because you give your quarterback a big contract does not mean you stop looking for the upgrade. I think the Rams gave Goff that contract because if they let Goff leave, they would have had nothing at the quarterback position, and the team would have regressed mightily. But if you stuck with Goff, I don't know that the Rams win that Super Bowl back in 2021. So what the Rams did was in the short term, they made sure they kept their quarterback in place. And they said, even if we're overpaying him a little bit, that's okay, because we need to have somebody playing quarterback. That's not going to stop us from going out and trading for Matthew Stafford and replacing Goff. So I think that's kind of the position the Jets would be in. And this speaks to another perception that I think is off in the NFL when it comes to quarterbacks. You don't necessarily need to commit to a quarterback for the long run. You just because you signed a quarterback to a contract, that doesn't mean he's your quarterback for the next 10 years. It wasn't the case with the Rams with Jared Goff. And there are other cases across the league you can name. The key is just because you give the quarterback a big contract, that doesn't mean that you have to stick with him forever. That doesn't mean that you never have to look for an upgrade. So I think at the end of the day, if Justin Fields has success with the Jets this year, they will and should look to give him a new contract, potentially with a raise. But that doesn't mean you stop searching for an upgrade. You just continue to monitor Fields' progress. If Fields has a great year this year, that's great for the Jets. He'll obviously be the starting quarterback in 2026, but he will only have one quality year under his belt. And I don't get the sense that it's very likely that Justin Fields is ever going to be like one of those true difference makers. But Fields having success, what it does is it gives you the opportunity. It essentially buys you time. It keeps you from being desperate in heading into the draft and feeling like you have to draft a quarterback, because that's when you make mistakes. The Jets, in recent years, they've allocated more high draft picks at the quarterback position than any other team in the league, and more frequently, desperation played a role in those picks. I'm not saying it's the only reason. I know that they liked the players. I know that they liked the prospects when they evaluated them, but I think there have been numerous instances in recent years where desperation, knowing that you need a quarterback, has been a bad part of the equation for the Jets, and it's led them to make draft mistakes. So I don't think it's a huge issue. Like, I don't view it as a no-win situation. If Fields plays well for the Jets this year, it's a huge win for the Jets. And if you can keep him around, you can get somebody who can provide stability at the quarterback position in the years ahead. That's another huge win for the Jets. Might you have to pay a little bit more than you'd like to? Sure, but there are two types of overpays in the NFL. There are the overpays, like I just mentioned, where is this guy worth the amount of money you're paying him? Probably not, but he might be more valuable to your team than he would be to another team, because he provides, if Justin Fields plays well and you're overpaying him a little bit, you could do the academic thing where it's like Justin Fields is the X highest paid quarterback in the league. Is he really that good? But you can also look at it from the Jets standpoint, where this player is providing a stability at the quarterback position. That is critical. We would not have another way to get him. We can overpay him a little bit. There's those types of overpays, and then there are the Trumaine Johnson overpays where you're giving out mega dollars to a guy who simply isn't that good. I think in a scenario where Fields has success this year, it would be the former. And the other aspect of this is I don't really like the idea that Fields succeeding is a problem for the Jets, because it kind of implies the Jets would be better off with Fields failing and then just moving on from him quickly. And I hear this a lot, when the Jets draft a quarterback. I heard this a little bit with Zach Wilson, where people say it's better Zach Wilson was a complete failure, so you can just get rid of him and not mediocre enough to stick with him for multiple years. If Zach Wilson was if Zach Wilson played at a higher level, the Jets would have won more games with him, and that would have been a better thing for the franchise. I think it's never better for a player to be a complete failure. So I'm pulling for Fields. I think that if he has success this year, it's a good thing for the Jets. Yeah, it creates decisions, but having a tough decision to make isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself. And I think that's another one of the issues, is that people think about hypothetical tough decisions that will need to be made the next year. And first of all, they're hypothetical, but second of all, that's why you have a GM in place. The GM's there to navigate the difficult situations. Having difficult situations is not a problem in and of itself. So I can't share the pessimism over Fields. I hope he plays well. The real question with Fields is, does he play well enough to justify continued investment for the Jets? And I think for the Jets, it obviously would be better if he did. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the wide receiver position. There is a recently drafted Jets player who could be in trouble. It's not normal that a day 2 pick from the previous year might not make the opening day roster, but Malachi Corley is in unfamiliar circumstances. And we'll talk about what those are as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Of course, in New York, we have the Knicks playing a Game 6 against the Boston Celtics, looking to go to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in 25 years. If you want to be at the Garden, Game Time's the place to get your tickets. And if you're a Jets fan, the schedule just came out. You want to go week 1 against the Steelers, week 2 against the Bills. any of the Jets games, home or away this season, Game Time's the place to get in on the action. I love Game Time. I've used it on multiple occasions, find great deals. I love the all-in pricing, no surprise fees when you check out, and the view from your seat. Give you a picture of what it's going to look like at your venue before you arrive, so no surprises, no obstructed views. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, one word with no space, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question comes from Taylor, who writes, John, I know that rookie minicamp means nothing, but it's a slow time of year and speculation is fun. I was intrigued by reports that Arian Smith outperformed Malachi Corley there. At what point in the offseason do you think such reports matter? Do you think Corley's roster spot could be in trouble now, even with how thin the receiver room looks? So that's an interesting question. Yeah, like the results of rookie minicamp don't mean a whole lot. Like Arian Smith was reportedly one of the stars, and a point I made on a show a couple of days ago, if you're an everyday or you heard it, is you would expect guys who are draft picks to play really well in rookie minicamp because they're going up against mostly UDFAs, guys who were not drafted, undrafted free agents. So of course, a guy who was drafted is going to play really well against undrafted players. Playing well against undrafted players doesn't mean you're ready to take on the NFL. It doesn't mean you're ready to take on veteran players. So I think there should always be caution about the reports performances out of rookie minicamp, because really it's just used to like hype up the high picks, because the first round pick's going to dominate UDFAs. I do think that it reports that Smith outperformed Malachi Corley. That says more about Smith than Corley, because Corley was a guy the Jets drafted and was very raw. And, Taylor's second question was, do I think Corley's roster spot's in danger? I do think it's in danger, because despite the Jets lacking quality at the receiver position, they have a lot of guys who seem like locks to make the roster. Garrett Wilson's obviously going to be on the team, and, he's the one exception when I say the Jets lack quality. Garrett Wilson's a high quality receiver. But after that, I mean, Allen Lazard reworked his contract to stay with the Jets. Now, I know there are a couple of rumors maybe the Jets can work out a deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you can get anything for Lazard. I would call that a win. But at this point, Lazard is going to be here. You've got Josh Reynolds, who you just signed in free agency. He's probably going to be here. Tyler Johnson, more of a depth guy, but he's probably going to be here. Arian Smith is certainly going to be on the roster. He was just a fourth-round pick. So that's five guys right there. There aren't many roster spots available. And then, you could maybe Irv Charles as a special teamer. Jets brought him back, and we know that they didn't bring him back to play the receiver position. That I would imagine the new coaching staff is intrigued by what he can do as a special teamer. So that's six right there. And then, one last spot. Is Corley even a better receiver than Xavier Gibson right now? I don't know that the answer is yes. I mean, we'll see what Corley does, but we knew he was a project. And the thing about being a project is you have to show improvement. You have to show, when the team invests in you to as a developmental player, you need to show that that investment is worthwhile. And that means showing progress. That means showing improvement. Corley, when he was drafted, he was just so raw. I mean, he was so raw that at the time I said that I felt like he might be better served just playing running back, because that's really what he did in college. He was a guy, he started as a running back. They nominally moved him to wide receiver, but moving him to wide receiver really meant he was catching screens. And as a running back, he was running over defensive backs instead of, trying to run through arm tackles of linebackers and defensive linemen. So he was bigger, he was going, and he was essentially able to play the running back position. He was able to do things after the catch against smaller players, running over, corners and safeties. There was not really a lot of route running skills that he flashed in college. Very minimally was he ever asked to run routes. And in the NFL, you have a very diverse route tree. And we saw that his rookie year where he did not contribute much. And for the Jets part, the Jets put expectations way too high for his rookie season. I mean, it was always a stretch to think he would be able to contribute anything as a guy who was very at the beginning stages of learning how to run a route. But the thing about being a project is when you're the project and the GM and head coach who drafted you get fired, you're in trouble, because you're not the project of the new people running the team. So I think Corley could be. I don't think Corley is a lock to make the roster at all. I think Malachi Corley's ability to make the roster is directly related to how much progress he shows in the offseason. It's unusual to see a guy drafted at the top of the third round cut in year 2, but it's a bit of an unusual situation. First of all, he was so raw when he was drafted, but also, we have new people in charge of this team who, may not be as committed to him as Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh were. Our next question is from Chris. Overall, I'm feeling good about the direction of the team after the draft. Although I feel like there's low-hanging fruit for improvement, it's adding one more receiver, and I like the idea of signing either Amari Cooper or Keenan Allen. I know what you're going to say about them being older guys, but if you get one of them to come in and be a competent second receiver and even put up 700 yards, it feels like that would be the last remaining glaring hole. I'm not saying the team is great at every other position, but at least you have guys in place that have a chance to be decent. And if you get that second receiver and Justin Fields has a good year, we have a shot at a decent season while setting up our future. All right, well, Chris, thank you for the question. You actually don't know what I'm going to say because I think it sounds like you thought I was going to reject the idea because they're both older players. I'm not. I think that either of them would be logical signings because, again, like we just went through the list of receivers that the Jets have. Outside of Garrett Wilson, they don't really have anybody who's that good. And you got to get someone in here who knows how to run a route other than Garrett Wilson. And I do think Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper are clearly on the downsides of their careers, but they probably would be better than anybody else, anybody that's currently on the roster outside of Garrett Wilson. I don't know how much is left in the tank for either guy, but I think it's worth a roll of the dice. The thing with the Jets offseason at the receiver position is there were a lot of individual moves where if it was just the individual moves made sense, but the entire picture, like all the moves together connected, didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Like I could justify keeping Allen Lazard on the pay cut, especially how steep the pay cut was. I could justify Josh Reynolds because he knows the system. Maybe he can help implement it. I could justify Tyler Johnson as a depth receiver, a guy who's probably not going to ever be a starter, but if you need him in the short term, he could be an option for you. But all three of those guys, you look at this receiver room now, like I could justify any of those individual moves, but doing all of them, I don't really understand what the Jets were doing there. And I think that this receiver room needs an upgrade. Now, yeah, they are older guys. And so one thing, I think the reason Chris, you thought that I was going to reject it because they're older is, the last couple of years I've been criticized the Jets for investing in too many older players. But the reason I was critical of the Jets for doing that it's not because I think the Jets can never sign an older player. It's not because I don't think there's ever a situation where older players can help. I think the reason I was critical of the Jets the last couple of years is that their entire team building strategy just seemed to be bringing in stars who were past their expiration date and expecting them to play at a high level. Dwayne Brown, we can go down the list. Obviously Aaron Rodgers was at the top of the list, but there were just so many guys that the Jets brought in the last couple of years who were older players. Tyron Smith, another example, guys who were former stars who were best days were gone, and the Jets just expected them to be stars, and that was the entirety of the Jets trying to build up their roster. It's different when you're looking at one select spot and saying, this is an older guy, but he might be able to be a bridge player for us this year. He might be able to help us in the short term. And I think that at the wide receiver position, that's certainly something the Jets should take a look at. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about coaching. We know that Jets coaching was awful last year. We know a new coaching staff's coming in, so expectations are we will see an improvement. But everybody always says that. Whenever you have a new coaching staff, people always say it's always going to be better. It doesn't always turn out that way. What reasons should Jets fans be confident coaching will be better this year? They exist. There are some really good reasons that we should expect the coaching to be upgraded. We'll go through them as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show today. Our next question, John, I know everybody's excited about the new coaching staff and everybody's expecting an upgrade, but every single fan base who fires their coach thinks that they're going to upgrade, and it doesn't always work out that way. How can we be sure that Aaron Glenn is going to be an upgrade over what the Jets had last year? That's a great point. And in almost every other situation, I would agree with you that we cannot assume that the new coaching staff will be an upgrade because it wasn't even in the offseason. Last year, when the Jets fired Robert Saleh in season, a lot of people said, well, Jeff Ulbrich can't be worse. And he was worse. So there's never a 100% guarantee, but I do think there are factors here that make it overwhelmingly likely that the Jets coaching will be better this year. And it's mainly about preparation. And it's also about, everybody having a defined role. I think one of the problems Jeff Ulbrich had last year was that he got the job heading into week 6. So he didn't have a full off season to really think through the small and the big things. How am I going to structure practices? When am I going to give older veteran players a day off? If this situation comes up in a game, how am I going to manage my timeouts? When you're hired as a head coach, you have months and months and months to really get used to all of this stuff, to really think through all of these hypotheticals, because you get hired in January, your first real game is until September. So you have a chance to think through all of those aspects. And you also have time to get used to the adjustment to being a head coach, because being a head coach is very different from being an assistant coach. I remember when Todd Bowles was hired, he talked about the biggest adjustment being when you're the head coach, you're coaching the coaches. You're the guy that's in charge. You're the one delegating responsibility, which is not true in your assistant coach. It's not even really true when you're a coordinator. You're the head coach. You're in charge of everything. And having 8 or 9 months to get used to that, that's a big deal. That's something Jeff Ulbrich did not have. And I think you could say the same thing on the offensive side of the ball. I think that Todd Downing was an upgrade over Nathaniel Hackett, but Todd Downing had to take over week 6, the play calling duties. And that was really tough. If Todd Downing had a full offseason, I think he probably would have produced better results. Beyond that, you actually have everybody filling a role, because you also have to remember that Ulbrich was handling both the duties as head coach and defensive coordinator, which is just too much. I mean, you do have coaches in the league who handle play calling duties, but they delegate a lot of the game planning, a lot of the other stuff to their coordinator. If you have an offensive head coach with an offensive background who calls plays, the offensive coordinator is actually still important, because the offensive coordinators plays a big role in formulating the game plan and coaching guys up during practice, stuff the head coach can't handle. So just because a head coach calls a play, that doesn't make him a coordinator. So Ulbrich was kind of pulled in both directions, and I'm kind of sympathetic towards him in that regard, because the Jets had fired Saleh, who was the other defensive mastermind. So if Saleh and Ulbrich both are both pulled away from the defense, how bad is the defense going to get? At least that was the theory. I mean, the defense got pretty bad under Ulbrich. So I think that it's not so much about the capability of the coaches, although I certainly hope Aaron Glenn's better than Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich. I certainly hope Tanner Engstrand's better than Nathaniel Hackett and Todd Downing. But it's also just about the preparation. The Jets are set up to have an actual coaching staff this year. They weren't set up to have an actual coaching staff through most of last season. So I think the odds are very high the Jets are going to have better coaching this year. I know everybody says that when they fire their coach, but these are unique circumstances brought on by everything that happened a year ago. Next question. What's the take about the Jets you have that almost everyone disagrees with, but you believe is true? I go back to the quarterback position. I think the Jets have been a little too focused on the quarterback over the last 15 years, which is, I know I'm going to get some pushback on that. I'm not suggesting that the quarterback's unimportant, but I think the Jets have been focused on the quarterback at the expense of everything else. And it's led to negative results, because, when you draft Sam Darnold and that is your only focus is on getting Sam Darnold, and you have a rookie in there, rookies need support. Rookies need an offensive line. Rookies need playmakers. And the Jets were so focused, used up so many resources to get Sam Darnold, that they didn't leave enough resources to put quality pieces around him. And that's part of the reason Sam Darnold failed. And it's part of the reason he had success last year in Minnesota. You could go down the line through all these quarterbacks they've had. Zach Wilson. The Jets probably would have been better served in 2021 trading down and recouping a bunch of extra picks, or taking Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell. But they were obsessed with the quarterback. And Aaron Rodgers, I mean, look at the last 2 years, look how much the Jets ignored everything else on the team just to try and make Aaron Rodgers happy. The quarterback position is very important. You can't succeed without a good quarterback, but I think what the Jets have done by obsessing over the quarterback has been counterproductive. It's caused harm to the rest of the team, but it's also put the quarterbacks in a tougher position than they needed to be. It's also prevented the quarterbacks from having success, because the Jets haven't supported the quarterbacks. They've been so fixated on the quarterbacks, they've actually hurt the quarterbacks. So very odd. It's an ironic situation, but it's kind of how it is. Next question. Who do you think the most overrated and underrated players are on the roster? this is always a tricky one because there are so many platforms these days, so many TV shows, so many studio shows, so many podcasts, message boards, blogs, that it's almost impossible to be like truly overrated or underrated, because you can find somewhere on the internet a player who, for any player, them being overrated or them being underrated. Since the question was asked, generally speaking, I think underrated, I go with John Simpson, the left guard. And I think he's underrated because, first of all, left guards don't really get a lot of attention, but also, the Jets made so many high profile moves last year that failed. Hassan Reddick, Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, that it kind of got obscured that one of the low key signings they made, John Simpson, was pretty good. John Simpson was a good player at left guard for the Jets. And that's actually very symbolic of the way free agency tends to work in the NFL. So often it's not like the big ticket signings that end up panning out for your team. It's the guys who are like less heralded, who are on the upswing of their career, who guys don't know about yet. Often what happens is like the big names are past their prime and declining. They're big names because they used to be good, but they're not good anymore. Whereas the best signings are the guys who are about to be good. And so that's where John Simpson fits. For overrated, that's a tough one because I don't think the Jets roster is very highly thought of right now. I might go, I hate to say anybody. I'd say maybe Jermaine Johnson, and not from the standpoint Jermaine Johnson's bad, just from the standpoint that, overrated means that the perception of you is a little too high. It doesn't mean that you're bad. I think Jermaine Johnson's a good player. I think there's a perception Jermaine Johnson's a star. I think that goes back to the Pro Bowl he made in 2023, which, in all honesty, I'm not sure he should have made that Pro Bowl. I think he was good in I think he was a good player. I'm not saying he was a bad player. I think he's a good starter. I think that a good starter at defensive end is absolutely worth a first-round pick. I think Jermaine Johnson was absolutely worth the pick the Jets used on him. But I do think maybe the perception is a little bit higher than the reality. Not a lot, but I do think there's a perception Jermaine's a star when he's really just a good player. And again, I'm not disparaging Jermaine because I think having a good player at defensive end is very important. But I think if we're talking like who's a little overrated, that might be where I go. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We will be back on Monday to talk more Jets.